is Monica Perez here today with the Henry Hazlitt Research Fellow from the Mises Institute. You can read all of his credentials, his writings, his works, all at Mises.org. So I will leave that to you if you want to know all of his credentials and background and economic bona fides. This is Dr. Jonathan Newman. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited because we just finished, my listeners and I, it's so funny. I never expected this to be a popular thing that I do, but I just like to read books usually out of copyright, preferably on the air, and just like say what I think about them. And people listen and we have a conversation and we're all getting a good education and still it's fun and social, but we're all kind of hacking away at it. So I thought we could get an expert in here to tell us. The subject is The Law by Frederick Bastiat. Oh, I have to tell you a story. So before we just went on air, Jonathan asked me, so first of all, I should say hello and thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so he said, well, how did you get into this? And no one has ever asked me that. Like, what made you a libertarian? No one has ever asked me that. And I didn't even tell him the story. It was the perfect opportunity for me to tell him the story that I told when I started the law, which was this. So my father died about 20 years ago, but his sister was kind of like-minded, Aunt Margaret. And one time, probably around 20 years ago, I stumbled upon The Law by Bastiat, which is a small work. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing I ever read in my life. Like, I love this so much. I got to tell Aunt Margaret. So I called Aunt Margaret. It's like, oh my gosh, you would love this book. It's The Law by Bastiat. She's on the other end of the phone. She goes, Monica, my dear girl, Daddy gave us, each and every one of us, a copy of The Law for our 12th birthdays, and we were expected to read it. And I was like, and she grew up in the projects. She just became an English teacher and had sounded like Katharine Hepburn. But it made me realize that the reason it resonated so much was that it was my heritage. There was a legacy there that colored what I was taught by my father and how people talked. And I think that's really important to have that. That's why the right to work and travel is great. And this comes up in Bastiat, to have suffrage super powerful, and then have people who don't really understand the power of that. So if you have the rule of law, people can't vote your rights away. It doesn't really matter who votes. But so that legacy of understanding the principles on which this country was founded and to which any greatness it had achieved should be attributed, I think it's great to start with the law. I feel like it's in my DNA. And so, I mean, this is a seminal work, is it not?
It is. Yeah, this is one of the ones that you hear the most often when you ask somebody, what was the first thing you read in the classical liberal, Austrian econ, libertarian sort of world? A lot of people have embraced the law. It's an on-ramp for a lot of people. It's sort of like an eye-opener. Like, people read this and they're like, usually what is happening is they have these ideas sort of ruminating in the back of their head, but they haven't articulated it. They haven't themselves written it down. They haven't read anything that has articulated those ideas. And so then they read this in this beautiful prose, even though it's from mid 19th century. It's just amazing how easy it is to read Bastiat. And so they latch onto it, and it sort of forms this foundation for them. It's like, oh yes, that's exactly right. Like, what Bastiat is saying is exactly what I've been thinking, that it's exactly right that people can use the state to accomplish their own ends. They can use the state to engage in legal plunder, all of those sorts of things that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, this is up there with, I would say, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt.
That was another one that my father had. This is what, anytime you want to open somebody's mind to the truth of economics, start with that one. And of course, that's why it's named that.
Yeah. So this one is up there with that one, as well as Murray Rothbard's "What Has Government Done to Our Money?" That one also has sort of this eye-opening sort of thing. It's a lot of people, they don't take the time to study money and banking and that sort of thing. And so when they open up Rothbard, what has government done to our money, their eyes are open and they see what's going on at the central bank, what is fractional reserve banking, that sort of thing. And so the law does that sort of thing as well with Bastiat's going through like what the state actually is, what is the state's nature.
So, I remember, and I should have done my homework on this. Do you happen to remember, wasn't Bastiat at this time? I mean, because I think the context of when he was writing is interesting. It's relevant. I think he wrote this in 1850, which I believe was the last year of his life, and that
Mm-hmm.
he even makes a little joke about not being able to breathe, like with my last breath, which is upon me. I guess he had TB or whatever, and ended up dying in Italy or something. But I don't know if I made this up or what, but I kind of thought he felt like, even I wondered if he had, or I thought I heard that there was some political pressure not to be speak this freely, but because he was ending his life, knew he was winding down, he like wanted to put it all out there. But it was this his last thing, and I think he did it for the good of humanity.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there might have been some pressure if he knew that he was going to have a short lifespan, which is, such a tragedy, by the way, because a lot of his publishing happened near the end of his life, which was already cut short. So, like, we can only imagine what sort of stuff he would have written if he lived, a few more decades. So, I mean, that's tragic, of course, but I his pamphlets were published, his essays were published, and so I don't know if he was like just a lone voice in the wilderness sort of thing, or if there actually was some readership. There were some people who were interested in these ideas, but like in terms of like the political context in which Bastiat was writing, it was definitely he was responding to the rise of socialism at the time. So Marx was also writing around the same time, but even before Marx, a lot of people think that socialism started with Marx, but there were all of these earlier socialists with actually even crazier ideas than Marx, if you can imagine. And so Bastiat was responding to these ideas and saying, no, this doesn't work, that doesn't make sense. A lot of the same sort of debates that are still alive today, unfortunately. And so he was responding to those socialists and their proposals, especially within the French government and the French parliamentary process.
He actually structures it that way, in that the way I see it is like kind of three parts. He lays out his basic economic truth, and then he takes people by name, most of whom I haven't heard of, and
Mm-hmm.
takes passages from each one of them and responds actually quite briefly, because they kind of are in themselves, in the context of what he already said, they don't make sense in themselves. They kind of are on their face stupid. But he responds to each one and then he wraps it up at the end. But it was in the beginning, the first third, where he lays out these fundamental principles of economics, and it's good because and we take this for granted, I think, as Americans, but he focuses on the law. He calls it the law. And he says, like, the law is there for a purpose. What is the purpose of the law? And is that purpose being perverted? And I don't know if in that context, everybody was like, yes, obviously we all agree. The only good law is don't touch me or my stuff. Like, that's my favorite Rothbard thing. I don't know if they recognize that, but that's exactly what he's saying. And I think that resonates with Americans. But I thought what we could do is, I actually have 5 or 6 passages, but I just thought there was like 5 or 6 places where he really lays out the most important things for us to understand in the context of what's being bastardized now, like what's
Mm-hmm.
being violated now. And this is the problem. Like, there are principles that we used to all recognize, and now we have these weird competing cults of personality, and like griping, and I'll get you back for, they've been mean to us for so long, let's be mean to them. And that's just not, it's not a principled position. And we need the principled positions, because otherwise, I mean, you can already see the people will say, and I know that you're in academia, so you're not reading newspaper every day, or hopefully not waste your time with that. But I live in LA, and people of Trump derangement syndrome are kind of like the flip side of the MAGA people, and they're
Mhm.
both focusing on who's getting power next. And I think it's important to remember that it's not about power, it's about protecting these very few simple rights. So, would it be okay for me to read a couple of these passages and then we can just react to them, or what do you think?
Yeah, let me just I'll just
Yeah,
comment on
please,
what
as
you were
much
just
as you like.
talking
Yeah.
about. I mean, you're absolutely right that we have this like this election cycle, and then like certain topics will come up in the news, and the debates always turn into like there's this very sort of narrow window. Are we going to do this? Or are we going to do this? And then like libertarians who are inspired by people like Bastiat or Rothbard, as we've mentioned, are like talking about something like way over here that's like just sort of off. It's not within those bounds, and so it's. I think that's why writings from Bastiat and Rothbard have this such like a. I mean, the first word that came to mind is radicalizing, but it's not like I'm marching down the streets with a Molotov cocktail or anything like that. But the reason why the debate between the so-called left and right today are the way they are is because the state has so much power. And this is something that comes up all of the time in the law, is that if you have this hugely powerful state that is capable of taking from some people and giving to others, then of course there's going to be this like vociferous, like competitive, aggressive, a cycle of people trying to garner the power, like get control of Congress, get control of the White House. And the reason why they want to do that is because they know that once they're in power, then they can receive all of these privileges, where they can pass on benefits to the people who donated to their campaigns, where they can enrich themselves and their own family and that sort of thing. So like those, all of that exists. And we would call that corruption. We would call that bad. But all of that exists because of state power, and that's why libertarians don't consider their views as radical as they sound to a normie, for example. That's fine. They would say that it's radical from the perspective of like what we have right now, but what libertarians are saying is like, no, all of the problems that we see is because of the amount of state power that exists as we have it. And so what we need to do is decrease state power, and that will solve all of the bickering, all the problems that we see between the left and the right.
I would say specifically, sorry, I have this crazy dog. My listeners are aware of it, but I'm sorry about that.
It's fine. I'm a dog person. It's
okay. We adopted this crazy dog, and he's awesome. He just barks his head off, and we're working on it. But he loves to be here when we're podcasting, though. So a good example is that the right to work and travel. You can't have, and he actually brings this up when he talks about universal suffrage, Bastiat. You can't have the right to work and travel if what you're also bestowing at the same time, and why no one talks about this, is you're bestowing the right to vote on those people. So, and I mean, I just mentioned this 2 seconds ago, but once, and why does that matter? Because the power of government is so great that it is definitely, those votes are used to take things away from one people and give them to another. And it's not just about taxation, it's about liberty as well. So why do I care if there's a constitutional amendment on gay marriage? Like, why do I care? Well, if marriage is something protected, and so I'm Catholic, if Catholic adoption agencies cannot choose to have a mother father home to put if that's like illegal for them to make that choice for themselves and their clients, then I have to care. So now all of a sudden, since everybody's controlling everyone's everything, I have to now decide what's right. And so it makes it complicated, and it's not just about your being stolen from, it's also your your choices and your freedom of association, and it's because the law perverts its purpose.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. The more that the state gets involved, the more it widens in scope. So I mentioned earlier about the state power and how big it is, but the more that it widens in scope, it means that like your regular Joe voters is having to make these decisions that apply across the board, apply to so many different things, and so that actually gives aid to the people who have this rhetoric where, like, if you vote against this sort of thing, you want people to die or you want people to suffer.
Right.
And it's so like, and like what you're voting on is, I don't think that there should be this like slight increase in some government program, and then there's tons of shrieking. It's like, oh, if you don't allow this to increase, then babies are going to die or something like that. And so like if the government is involved in everything, it just means that the stakes are higher, which means that that's what causes like these elections to be such a polarizing time, and
Even
allows
though
people to employ that sort of rhetoric. Go
I
ahead.
think we're getting to something I hadn't thought of before, which is I always wonder until this second, I'm like, why are people fighting harder than ever on the two
Hmm.
sides when the welfare warfare super state is converging in the liberal fascist center? Like everybody wants the same thing. Like we have war in Ukraine from Democrats, we have war in the Middle East from Republicans, we have more welfare here, more welfare. But I think this is the answer because it's no longer about principles or ideology at all. It's simply about who controls the fruits of the plunder. And that
Hmm.
is what's happening. And I noticed that a current event that may be relevant is that Trump is got all these ideas. He writes executive orders about AI and investment and all these things. And he's making side deals with countries and law firms and stuff like, I'll leave you alone if you send me $500 billion. It's super complicated, like it's not as simple as that, but it's just using those levers of power to do what you want and manipulate the system, which always results in like deadweight loss or whatever. Like you're always costing somebody when you make things inefficient. And Bastiat actually focuses on slavery and tariffs. Like he's super against tariffs as a taking. um but yeah, so it's really about who's controlling the fruits of the
Hmm.
plunder. And that just clarified something for me right then, because I was just like, don't people realize the ideology is gone? But that made the fighting worse.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And what's interesting, you were talking about how Bastiat would he would pull quotes from his opponents, and so he would say, here's what this person said, and then he would respond. What's interesting is that when Bastiat does that, or when Ron Paul is on the debate stage, or you hear other people who are in favor of liberty, oftentimes like they are putting their opponents in the best light. They're assuming that they have good intentions, and they're saying like, yeah, you might have these good intentions, but here's all these unintended consequences of the policy. But you're absolutely right. Like one thing that Rothbard was especially good at when he would do like history books, writing about economic history or the founding of the U.S. or talking about the progressive era, is that he would actually name names. He wouldn't. I mean, he was still scholarly about it, but he didn't hesitate to say this person gained X amount by being in charge of this sugar company when like this tariff was imposed or something like that. So like he would actually go through and he would look at like which parties were actually benefiting as a result of these policies being put in place. Now Rothbard at the same time, he would do the same thing that Bastiat would do, which is, sir, you have great intentions, but this policy is going to have all these unintended consequences. But Rothbard would also, pair on the other side of the coin. He said, "Here's the reason why they're doing it anyway." So yeah, we can show that even if these people had good intentions, it's still going to have bad consequences. However, our explanation for why they're doing it, uh, getting rid of the assumption of good intentions, is, oh yeah, these people are benefiting, like they're getting millions of dollars or something like that by implementing tariffs, by implementing all sorts of product regulations, and so on and so on.
My father always puzzled over why rich states were blue, which, by the way, is an inversion. Like used to be like red would be the commie side, but anyway, it's like why is Connecticut vote Democrat? And it occurred to me one time, and I may even have gotten down to it, like literally, like the poorest states are the Republican states. And I was worked in banking, and I went to law school. So you meet a lot of lawyers and bankers and stuff. And I said, well, all the lawyers and the bankers live there, and they benefit from contracts, from deals. And
Mhm.
California's got defense and tech, which highly benefits. So they love the government having all the money because they're getting it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah. One more thing that I'll add there. I know we want to get through the quotes at
no,
some
no,
point, but
we don't
you
need to
just
get through the
reminded me of
quote. That
something.
was just
Uh,
we're doing it.
yeah. One thing. Some of my friends, Jeff Degner and Patrick Newman, no relation to me. They're working on this paper that's showing how you can explain the concentrated incomes, like around Washington D.C., for example, by Cantillon effects. And so Richard Cantillon, he's actually mentioned in the foreword by Tom DiLorenzo to the Mises Institute's edition of the law. Cantillon explained how if you have an increase in the money supply, some people receive that new money first, and they're able to spend it, and so they're enriched. They're able to buy goods before prices rise. Other people don't never see an increase in their income, or they only see it later in this spending chain. And so there's actually a real redirection of resources from the outskirts of the economy, what we might consider the rural areas, to the hubs, especially like the banking and finance hubs of our country. And so that's just another example of that's actually a more subtle way of legal plunder that Bastiat talks about. So a lot of times the examples of legal plunder that Bastiat is talking about is like a tariff or a tax or a subsidy, where like you can literally see like money coming out of one person's pocket and into somebody else's pocket. But in the case of money printing, it's much more subtle, but it is plunder. Like you're taking resources away from one group and giving it to the people who are closest to the money spigot, closest to the Fed, closest to the banking system.
Well, not to get too tangential, but I would say two other things that are like that, and just straight up Keynesian inflation and the idea of sticky wages is about the holders of assets. I always use the gas station as an example. The guy who owns the oil, when there's inflation, your prices at the gas pump go straight up. The guy who's working the register is still making $10 an hour. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what sticky wages are. If you can't lower the guy's wages so that you can gobble up all the productivity improvements, inflate it, and that helps the holders of assets, the net holders of assets, which obviously I would say are the people most influence. But I don't even like public transportation for that reason. If you can't pay someone a living wage to come to work with their own car and live in their own house, you're not paying them enough. So it's really, in my opinion, a massive corporate subsidy to have quote affordable housing and public transit. What do you think they're using those buses for? They're using their buses to go to a job that's not paying them enough
Yep. Yep.
to pay for a bus. Like I don't even care if they have a car, but the buses are subsidized. And it's really, I'm getting tangled up. So I hope that maybe you can give me an answer. I'm getting more and more frustrated with the language. Like I'm tempted to say capitalist. Like it seems like, and I would never ever say that before, but it's like there is that corpo governmental continuum that seems to be in control. And it doesn't even have to be a conspiracy, although I believe in massive conspiracies. But they all have the same interest. It's in the interest of every Walmart and every Costco to have public transportation subsidized. And but I don't know what to call that. I guess I'm just going to call it the corporatism. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not as sexy of a term, but yeah, corporatism or cronyism,
Yeah,
yeah, or
but it's
just
definitely a
more general
top-down thing.
statism.
Now it's like fascism. Yeah, like now we're really seeing it because Trump is actually interacting with companies, with boards, with CEOs, with shareholders publicly, which don't get me started on that, but interfering with that, having them make commitments to build here and all. I mean, it's extreme. It really feels fascistic. And also, even the policies of going into DC and going into LA, and maybe you're skirting a law that says, oh, okay, it's not posse comitatus if blah, blah, blah. But obviously, we know these are the first steps and not the last steps. I almost feel like I'm being gaslit, as they say. Like I almost feel like, I'm like rolling back somebody said a V for Vendetta, like just I wonder why I'm being distracted by this cookie cutter stuff and what they're what they're really up to. Who knows? These are all signs that they are not adhering to fundamental principles that this country was founded on. We
Yeah,
were promised this.
I understand like the feeling of being gaslit, but I also, maybe it's just like an optimism I have. Maybe it's a bad sort of optimism. But actually, I think there like actually is evidence of this. There has been a huge turning point. There have been a number of turning points. Like the Ron Paul presidential campaigns were big turning points where a lot of people were sort of introduced to these ideas. But even recently, in the past couple of years, there has been a big turning away from Trump, where like Trump on the campaign would say one thing, and now he's doing something different. And like, while you're absolutely right, there are lots of people who are still on board the Trump train, and they'll never disagree with Trump no matter what. But like, especially in the case of the bombing of Iran, like I saw a ton of people fall out of their favor with Trump. Like they decided, I'm not on board with this anymore. This is not what I voted for. I don't want to do this sort of thing. And so I'm thinking of like people like, Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, Scott Horton, like these guys, they've got like much bigger platforms now. And I think it's because a lot of people, they want to hear this sort of commentary. They want to hear this, like what you're talking about, this sort of principled, like understanding of like, what is the state? What is freedom? What is liberty? And they saw that Trump is not delivering this, and they're being critical. So I'm seeing that popularity as a sign for optimism, or a case for optimism, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is definitely I agree with you there. People are seeing it. I sometimes wonder if when they pull back the veil, it can because they've already accomplished what they want to accomplish. But I'm going to keep hope alive because I always do fall back on the fact that they keep this 24/7 news cycle going. They have this propaganda machine that basically doesn't even let you breathe. And they have to be doing that because it's necessary. It's necessary to just drown out all thought. Or, I used to say this about, well, I have a son who has Down syndrome. Like you can say you're eradicating Down syndrome, but it always comes back. It's not a genetic, like it's a mutation. Like it always comes back. You can have all the abortions you want, but eventually, if you stop doing that, they will always come back. And I feel that about the impulse for liberty is that you can depress it, but it's totally natural and it'll come back. And I think that's what they spend all their effort in suppressing. And I think that's why Bastiat and Ron Paul resonate with people, because of the obvious truth of the basic principle. And one of them is the first passage that I wanted to say, which is, if you can't do it, they can't do it. So here's the passage. It's from page 2 in that copy you referred to, which I got out of a PDF from Mises.org. What then is law? As I have said elsewhere, it is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. As the force of an individual cannot lawfully touch the person, the liberty, or the property of another individual, for the same reason, the common force cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, the liberty, or the property of individuals or of classes.
Yeah. So my I don't know if you were opening that up for me to respond. Like what I get from this is what Bastiat is saying is that if we don't have a right as an individual, then we can't delegate that non-existent right to a group. So if you wanted to pass a minimum wage law, what you're saying is, I'm making it illegal for people to work below a certain wage. Now, you as an individual can't, go up to some wage contract negotiation that you see going on and go up to them and say, you guys, you have to keep a wage above a certain level, or else I'm going to throw you in jail, or else I'm going to give you a fine or something like that. Since you don't have that authority yourself to dictate what other people are deciding what is this wage contract going to look like, since you don't have that ability or that right as an individual, then you can't delegate that to your representative in your government. You can't delegate that to the police. You can't delegate that to anybody who might step in on your behalf to do the same thing. And so that's what Bastiat is talking about there, is that if you don't have the right as an individual, then you can't delegate it to somebody else to carry it out for you. And so that's where he sees this clear dividing line. What should government be allowed to do? Well, like what is law in the proper sense? And the answer is it's a negative sort of thing. It's preventing people from doing things that they don't have the right to do.
So I have an extremely uncomfortable edge case on that I would like
Okay.
your response to, if you're ready for something extremely uncomfortable.
I'll see if I can come up with a diplomatic answer.
Yeah. So I don't like abortion. I think it's killing babies. I love my son who has Down syndrome and all his little friends. I think it's wrong. I think it's taking a life. I don't know if Rothbard's last word on it was, yeah, that kid's trespassing. Like people do. I read a tweet tagline once that said Rothbard was right about everything except abortion, which I believe in. However, in this case, I will say this: when I really bring the thought experiment out to the very limits, if you want to end your pregnancy and you want to do that by starving yourself or even taking a pill or whatever, and I know this is going on in the house next door, can I break into that chick's house and tie her up in my basement and put a feeding tube down her throat? Like, can you have a law that can't be enforced? Too much? Is that too much? Did I miss something? Did I skip a few steps?
Well, no. I mean, that's an interesting thought experiment. It's not something that I've put any thought into. I don't know. I agree with you. I'm against Rothbard on this abortion question. I think he got that wrong. I think life begins at conception. So I'm with you there. But in terms of these like sorts of situations where somebody is like starving themselves and it's because that they're trying to get rid of the baby in the womb, I don't know. I don't know what's permissible there.
Yeah, I mean, and when I say it like that, like I can see that is something that is kind of unenforceable. But I always say, I put it this way: you walk into a room and a doctor is performing an abortion on a woman. You could, if you're defending that life, you could theoretically shoot that guy to save that life, but you can't shoot her because it won't save life. It's a tricky one about how do you enforce that particular law. And I always start with that. They're like, what about rape and incest? Well, like, let's just start with the basic concept. Is it wrong or is it not wrong? And I agree with you. Life starts at conception. But so that's the only case I ever found where I was not 100% sure that the power of the authorities and the power of you as an individual are not in total alignment. And I'm not suggesting that we err on the side of the power of authority in that case. I would do the opposite, but and maybe that's how you do it. It's like, I actually don't have the right to go in there and do it, but that doesn't mean we have to deny the reality of what's right and wrong. But yes, so and I even say that about like defense. Why does the government have weapons that we're not allowed to have? Why do they even have them? I mean, and then you say, well, do you really need ICBMs? And I'm like, well, do they really need ICBMs? Like what is defense? What is ICBM for? And we create them and disseminate them everywhere. So we're responsible for their need anyway.
Yeah. I mean, these sorts of discussions are a little bit like outside of my bailiwick. I know like there's plenty of like stuff in Rothbard and other libertarian authors, that, including some who are alive today, that they talk about all of these sorts of like special cases and like what we might call like lifeboat situations, where it seems like our intuition says it's right to do this sort of thing, but if we're strictly following the non-aggression principle, then that means we shouldn't do this. I don't have all of the answers on all of those sorts of lifeboat situations. Like, should we allow people to have ICBMs? Probably not, but I don't know where that fits. I don't know where that fits with like a libertarian conception of rights. All I know is I think abortion is murder, and also I would like to carry guns. How about
You
that?
you got me there. I actually don't like the edge cases, but I always thought that was one where I can acknowledge that we get outside the realm of just very simple black and white sometimes. Okay.
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I don't want to give the impression that I think that talking about these edge cases is like a waste of time. It's very important for scholars who are steeped in the philosophical literature and the political literature and law as well. I think it's important for them to like figure these things out. I think there's also something to be said about the way like a legal system evolves over time, and so a lot of these things that it's not clear like when exactly does life begin. That's not something that's like immediately obvious to every person, or else there wouldn't be this debate over abortion. I think if you have bottom up evolution of the legal system, I think you'll get the sorts of outcomes that are acceptable to most people in those cases where it's not as clear as somebody's trespassing on my property and I'm allowed to vacate them.
You make a great point because, and we are talking about the law, that's the name of it. I like common law because the basic rules don't touch me or my stuff. But over the millennia, there are cases where, well, is it my stuff? How do you determine like who gets the wood if the tree falls? Whose water is it if it's flowing? Can you build a dam? Like these are legitimate questions. And over the millennia, only questions that really come up. They don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
hypothetical. They are precedents. So if it's established, it's established. And I have a lot of respect for really long established law within the same
Yeah.
kind of geographic context. And I will say that those edge cases can tease out nuances of the underlying principles. But again, they come out in real precedents. So you're right. Anyway, okay. So the next one is when plunder is organized by law for the profit of those who perpetrate it, all the plundered classes tend, either by peaceful or revolutionary means, to enter into some way into the manufacturing of laws. These classes, according to the degree of enlightenment at which they have arrived, may propose to themselves two very different ends when they thus attempt the attainment of their political rights. Either they may wish to put an end to lawful plunder, or they may desire to take part in it.
And we see that there's one case here that's very rare, and that's the Ron Pauls and the Thomas Masseys and those sorts of Rand Paul to an extent. So I mean, there's this famous quote that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there's this like strong incentive. Once you get into power, I'm going to try to make the laws in such a way that I benefit and my friends benefit and my family benefits, or the groups that I like. I'm going to try to take from some and give to people who I like. It's not all personal benefit. Like I'm trying to use the law to line my own pocketbooks. So like sometimes like you just either from your upbringing or like some story tugs on your heartstrings, and so you think that you have this not only do you have the ability, but you have this duty basically to take from some and give to this favored group. Like maybe the group is truly disadvantaged. Maybe this group is maybe they haven't maybe they're living a life that they don't deserve or something like that. But what Bastiat is pointing out here is that as soon as people are in the position to manufacture laws, he says, then there's going to be this incentive for them to give special privileges, take from some, give to others, take from Peter, give to Paul.
Yes, and I think it's valid to say that people have different points of view. So if you're not particularly productive in this economic situation, you don't achieve as much. It's only right because you're not contributing as much, but you could see that as an injustice and want to change that, and not think that you're stealing. But you have to take that one step removed where all these regulations, and someone was asking about Bastiat's anti-tariff stance, and maybe this is a good place to sit to for you to maybe expound on how that it's a kind of a degree of separation from like really stealing, but he calls it plunder.
Mhm.
So you want to use that example?
Yeah. So the reason why Bastiat was in favor of free trade and against tariffs, against protectionism, is because he saw tariffs and protectionism as the state giving this special privilege to either a certain industry or maybe even a certain firm, or maybe domestic manufacturers in general, something like that. So without the tariffs, without the protectionism, it means that those companies, those domestic companies, would have to compete with foreign producers. And of course, they don't want to compete with foreign producers because maybe those foreign producers can produce the same good cheaper. Maybe they can produce more of it. And so they want to be able to sell what they produce at higher prices. And what better way to do that than to get the state to erect basically trade walls, like walls around your country that prevent these other foreign producers from bringing their products into your country. So if you don't have that competition, then you can increase your prices. You suffer from, or the market suffers from other problems like a decrease in quality. So like another dimension by which competition causes firms to change their products is not just with price, but also with the quality of the goods that they produce. More competition means more rivalry in trying to satisfy consumers, and so they're trying to provide more. They're trying to provide more at lower prices, and they're trying to provide more at lower prices at better quality as well. So the reason why you're right, a tariff is not as simple as like I'm going to tax this group and then give the money as a subsidy to this group, but it's still taking from some, namely domestic consumers who would prefer lower priced goods from like wherever people can produce it. So you're taking from them, and the benefit that you're providing is this protection from competition to the domestic producers. So that's why it's plunder. It's legal plunder when you're using the state to enforce that sort of thing.
And I would say it's plunder primarily. We're concerned with the plunder against the consumer because a counter argument will be, well, China subsidizes its steel, so it's not like a private steel manufacturer is actually giving it at a price that could clear the marginal cost of producing it. It's that, so we have to counter that because it's hurting our industry. And then I was always taught, like, just do something else. Like I like that people have the right to do whatever is their God-given talent. So I'm not crazy about other countries subsidizing whatever, quote, dumping. However, I have the right to transact with them. And as we can see, it creates a total moral hazard when it comes to the political power that it gives. And it's a real taking in that not only does it create a distorted market where the consumer gets less, but that tariff money is confiscated by the government.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Yeah.
use it to bomb that country who just tried to sell you cheap steel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot to it, but ultimately it's when you get less for the effort that you put into every dollar you earned, that's a taking.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So like one of the most common objections that you hear is that well other countries aren't being fair. It's like I hear what you're saying. Yeah, we should want free trade. Tariffs are protecting domestic industries, but we need to protect the domestic industries because the competition that they're facing isn't fair because their countries, the governments in the other countries are subsidizing those industries, which means that the competition these domestic manufacturers is facing isn't fair. Which, like, on its face, that's like, it's difficult to argue with that. But you're exactly right. What matters is the rights of the consumer. Like, from the consumer's perspective, China subsidizing one of its industries and providing cheap goods to the U.S. is like, oh, thanks, China. Thanks, Chinese government.
Tariff. That is the tariff. Only we're getting the benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let them go
exactly.
bankrupt trying to give us steel for cheap. Like even as a kid, I was like, I don't even understand this argument. They're giving us steel too cheap.
Yeah, You're exactly right. So if you want to put like the argument in different terms, like we would understand that China subsidizing some of its industries is like China shooting itself in the foot, because like we're getting cheaper steel than we otherwise would, and China is suffering as a result. Like they're not getting they're not economizing their steel production as well. All these other unintended consequences. So like they're shooting themselves in the foot. And then the argument from the protectionist side is, well, we need to erect tariffs to protect domestic industry, which is us shooting ourselves in the foot. So like it doesn't make sense if your opponent is shooting him or herself in the foot. It doesn't make sense for you to shoot yourself in the foot. To like just, take the win for what it is.
And we can see that when they do that, when they engage in really anti-economic policies of their own, those things collapse. I mean, Japan, China has ghost cities. Like that stuff doesn't last forever. And a much better plan would be to demonstrate the incredible productivity and standard of living that comes from economic liberty. And unlike a lot of these other things, you can see it in just a couple of cycles. Like, in my lifetime, I saw Japan and China have bubbles burst because of, whatever state control. So, yes, we agree on that. Okay. The next one is, and this is a good one. This is an interesting one I want to talk about. Okay. No society can exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree, but the safest way to make them respected is to make them respectable. When law and morality are in contradiction to each other, the citizen finds himself in the cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or of losing his respect for the law, two evils of equal magnitude between which it would be difficult to choose. So if the law has to be respectable, you have to basically have the consent of the governed, and either they have to change their morality to something distorted or lose their respect for the law. And I have a few examples, but I want to hear what your reaction is.
Oh no, I think you summed it up well. So yeah, we can hear those examples. Basically, whenever you enact laws that take from some and give to others, and then you have people vote on this sort of thing, you might be putting somebody in the position where they're a beneficiary of that law. And so and suppose like they have, good solid principles. Now you're putting them into the situation where if I vote against this sort of thing or vote against this program that's benefiting me, then I'm going to lose out, financially speaking or whatever, or I'm going to lose my position or something like that. But like there's this conflict within them. Like if I vote for it, I'm not doing well. If I vote against it, I'm not doing well. And so, yeah, Bastiat is saying that whenever the state expands beyond what it ought to, it's putting people in this bad position. And so he's saying the best thing to do is to just have good laws, just have laws that are protecting private property.
Pragmatism, and people want to trade places with each other. Who gets to plunder? But I was thinking, I remember somebody called, and it took me a long time, like maybe years before I really understood it. Someone called and said it was an African guy who was older. He remembered the 60s. And he was saying, like, we had so much respect for Americans, so much hope when like JFK, blah, blah, blah. And then they started doing things that were wrong. And now we don't respect America anymore. And I realized that the whole, they don't use this expression anymore, but American exceptionalism, that word does not mean American extraordinariness. It means exceptionalism, and the exception is the law of sovereignty. So I think, like I've read it, so when they go over to the Middle East, they say, well, we respect the law. Like if Assad bombed Texas after Waco, we would nuke Assad. But Assad did something reactionary during, an Arab Spring that I'm sure we created, and put terrorists in or whatever, did stuff that we do every day saying, well, terrorists, so no rights. And then we, whatever, burn his whole country to the ground. But the idea is we go over there, the empire goes over there and displays a lack of principle and respect for fundamental law, and not only diminishes people's respect for us and also for law. Not only do they have no motive to stand up for the moral right of law, they really can't even, because they have to fight this other power, and they have to do it, like the opening scene of American Sniper. Why do you think that woman and child had bombs under their things? You think because they're assholes, or do you think because you're in their country? Like, not to get too political on you, but I'm just saying, and maybe, you disagree with all of that, but the principle is true. Like, if you go in there and mess with there is no exception to the rule of law. And if you have such exceptions, the whole thing collapses, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. So, we've all heard this line repeated, so many times, like they hate us for our freedoms, and like this is just a pure propaganda sort of thing. So, like why would you hate somebody because they can, go to the mall or go to the McDonald's or something like that? It just doesn't make any sense. And so, like, clearly, and like I can't make the case like somebody like Scott Horton can, because he's got like this library in his head that he can just pick things off the shelf in his mind and cite things. But yeah, like I'm firmly convinced that the reason why America is hated in these other countries is exactly what you said. It's because we're not respecting the rule of law. It's because we're going in there, and you're exactly right. We're acting as if we're the exception. Like we can do whatever we want. It's sort of like a might makes right sort of thing, as opposed to what Bastiat is talking about, making laws and our actions respectable. Like the best way to be respected is to be respectable. So like I'm 100% with you.
And I think another maybe less obvious example is when the immigration thing is a real problem. Like once they don't, I would say, like, if you had absolute private property rights, you wouldn't have a border issue, but they've removed some of those rights to the border. You actually you are denied the freedom of association in the strictest sense. And that is why you're then like, well, if I can't ban these people from my neighborhood, I got to go back. I got to go out to the borders to do it, because that's the only place you're allowing me to do that. So that's a complicated issue, but they're like, illegal immigrants are criminals and they need to go to jail. I'm like, well, here's the problem with that. They're exercising their right to work and travel. And as a starving father, he knows that who need somebody to do my lawn, or help me with my kids, happy to let them live in my basement. He knows there's nothing immoral about that. Nothing. The immigration thing carries a bunch of baggage, but he had to break laws that are not valid in order to feed his family and exercise a right he inherently knows he has. And I think that's why saddling that, green card with like inevitable citizenship, inevitable voting rights, and then the voting rights, inevitably undermine the Constitution. But that is, I think, the problem with like the millions and tens of millions of immigrants here who are not inherently criminal in breaking laws. Because I'd like your reaction to that, because these days I feel kind of sick even just saying that, because I really don't want 7 billion people pouring over for welfare and whatever, free college. But
yeah, no, I think you're right. The issue with immigration, and this is sort of like abortion. Like you could find like staunch libertarians who are on opposite sides of the abortion debate, and you can do the same thing with immigration. So I'm more on the side of restricting immigration, but the reason for that is because I think that what we've had is government subsidized immigration. That a lot of the immigration that we have is because of the welfare state that we have here. It's a lot of it is just like politically driven. I think there's some, I don't have like hard evidence of this, but I think there's some political corruption going on. Like if we bring in a bunch of immigrants, then that might mean that this state or this county or this jurisdiction will tip this political direction as opposed to this direction. And so I think there's been a lot of that. But like ultimately what I think we ought to have is just private property. Like private property just solves this problem immediately.
Totally.
So if you think about like what borders are, like what borders are you in control of? And that's the borders around your property. And like you have final say over who's allowed in, who's not allowed in. And so like we're taking this decision that should reside with each individual person in the property that they reside in, or maybe their community, like if
Yeah,
they're
their
grouped together
contiguous property is fine too.
yeah, exactly. And like in the case of an HOA. Now I know HOA is like a bad word for a lot of people, but like that, like
Voluntary.
exactly. If it's voluntary, then people are deciding what rules do we want all of the people who are living in this little community to follow. Like we don't want these sorts of, yard decorations. You've got to cut your grass at least this many times throughout the summer, that sort of thing. And if they all agree to that, and if people agree to those rules once they move into that neighborhood, then I think that then they would have the set of rules that works for them. And there obviously would be some sort of process by which those rules could be changed by hopefully unanimous choice or close to unanimity. But in the case of this immigration, it's like we're taking that decision that would apply to very local level, and we're nationalizing it to these massive, miles and miles and miles long stretches of land, and like there's people rushing over. There's all sorts of bad political incentives. It's not something that's going to be solved, and so it's one that is solved by private property. And if that's what we had, it would be okay. And what would regulate immigration is the market. It would be the price of land in this area versus the price of land in this area, the price of housing, what are jobs paying over here versus over here, what's the cost of living in this area versus this area, what's the culture like over here, what's the culture like over there. And so like those sorts of voluntary decisions that people would make, that where they're weighing the costs and benefits of moving to one community versus another, that would all be regulated by market prices, which is how we economize the use of labor, economize the use of land. The same thing would apply to people.
Yeah. I think like in Texas, I had a friend who had a ranch on the border of the Rio, and he said that border is 100% totally controlled by the drug guys on the Mexican side. So anyone who tries to cross the Rio on his land gets shot. So he can't even go to the edge of his own land anymore. But that completely closed the border. And it made me think that all you would need for border control is to restore absolute private property rights just to California and Texas and Arizona, and just to the border states. And then my guy with the ranch, that ranch would be basically free. Like people don't even want that ranch. Somebody would take that ranch who's like got locked and loaded all along there. And that's a big responsibility, but it's his own property. And he would be defending it for all of us. And if he wasn't, the next guy would. And so it would actually, that economic value would accrue to the people who were doing it. And I mean, that would contribute to some of the things that you're thinking about, like where do you go?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Now, in terms of like people truly invading, like there's a military invasion, I can recommend some reading for your listeners. There's a great book by Robert Murphy called Chaos Theory. And there he's talking about like in a purely voluntary society, how would communities or how would cities, protect themselves from that sort of invasion? I know that's like a little bit different than what we're talking about with immigration, but in terms of thinking about like how can a group of people solve these sorts of like problems that we face today with like countries and cultures who hate each other. We've got massive flows of people. Like how can people deal with that in a way that's consistent with libertarian principles? That's a great book to read. It's called Chaos Theory.
That is very interesting. And I'm pretty positive I have it on my,
It's
I
and it's
have
short too.
a book acquisition problem. I buy too many books. Yeah, sure. I love Murphy. So that's, and those are important questions and there are answers to them. And I think we don't have, because we just keep getting so far removed from liberty and the natural consequences thereof, which not only control behavior through rewards and punishments, but elevates the competence of the citizenry, because all of a sudden it doesn't take long to realize that you're sleeping around, you're going to get knocked up. Like you've got like morality emerges from consequences. So so I always think about in the abortion issue, there's been like 40 or 50 million abortions in this country since Roe versus Wade. I'm like, there wouldn't have been 50 million unwanted, quote, or children born to mothers who didn't want to have them. There wouldn't be 50 million. There'd be like 5 million. but because the consequences do check the behavior.
Mhm.
And but I think we had the a real libertarian experiment in the 19th century, and then I think it was a problem for the powers that be to not have the power. But so let's see. That's the next one. A citizen cannot at the same time be free and not free. Mr. de Lamartine, so he's actually talking to people here, Bastiat, wrote to me one day thus: Your doctrine is only the half of my program. You have stopped at liberty. I go on to fraternity. I answered him, the second part of your program will destroy the first. And in fact, it is impossible for me to separate the word fraternity from the word voluntary. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's excellent. So what Bastiat is saying here is that if you have this idea that the state should be in charge of of like a social safety net, of making sure that the least of these, the poor, the downtrodden, that they don't, fall through the cracks and end up, homeless on the streets and that sort of thing. If you think that the state should be involved in those sorts of things, like that's a noble goal, right? To want to provide for these people. But what Bastiat is pointing out is you can't have that and liberty, because doing that sort of thing, providing for like some so-called social good, promoting anything that would be considered what these writers are talking about with fraternity, brotherhood, collective public goods, these sorts of things. If you're going to try to provide for those things, that's going to involve the negation of liberty, because you're going to have to take from people to fund those things. You're going to have to take through taxation, which is a coercive levy. You have to take from people in order to provide those sorts of things. And so that's why Bastiat said, he says, and in fact, it is impossible. Oh, excuse me. The second part of your program will destroy the first. And then there's like this interesting add-on, which I started to read mistakenly. He said, and in fact, it is impossible for me to separate the word fraternity from the word voluntary. So like if you think about like what is community, what is cooperation, what is people working together in like a peaceful sort of way, and for Bastiat, it is the market economy. It's the division of labor. It's people voluntarily working together, working for one another, providing for one another in the market voluntarily. And now, sometimes that means like actual charity. Sometimes that means like, oh, this person that I know just had this terrible tragedy, and so I'm going to take money out of my pocket and give it to them. Bastiat would have no trouble with this. So he's not a Randian. He's not he's not on board with like the all the Rand stuff. He would say that's totally fine, because that person deemed it worth his money to part with it to provide for his friend who's going through a rough time. So like people do that, and Bastiat would be 100% okay with that. What the problem is when the involuntary stuff comes in, when you're trying to, when you try to make people be charitable, you actually ruin charity. So, which is, exactly what he's saying here.
And that it's not fraternity if it's coerced. The very
Exactly.
essence of it is that it's of a love, a fraternal love. And I actually was thinking about this recently because I looked up the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. So I don't know if you've ever heard of those. It's a Catholic thing. It's like 7 things that you're supposed to do in each case. I'm going to look at, I haven't done my homework, but the corporal works, I was raised on it. So like you're taught to do these things, and it's like feed the hungry, visit the sick. I think you visit the imprisoned, bury the dead. Like there's 7 physical things you do. And then there's spiritual things you do: educate, pray, blah, blah, blah. So I was looking through the corporal works of mercy, and like 4 of the 7 have been totally hijacked by the welfare state. So I don't have the money to do it. Like we live in California. So anytime my husband's ever gotten a raise or whatever, the tax bracket goes up. So you work more hours, you have to live closer to the job. Your kids have to, go to private school then, and you made no benefit. It's really annoying. So you don't have a lot of extra money to throw around, but almost all of it, I don't know if you've ever looked at the budget, like a huge percentage of it is redistribution of wealth. And I include in that public schools, because I can't send my kids to public schools. So they redistribute the wealth. And so you don't have it. They give it to people in a way that corrupts them, in my opinion. not only in how they give it and how it's used, but they've made those people who would be grateful, virtuous, maybe pray for you when you give them something, into thieves. And they've made you, there's no opportunity. I mean, yes, you can find, say, listen to drunk people and stuff like Mother Teresa said. You can definitely do that. You can find ways to be good. But this was an obligation, and you've actually been robbed of that, and it's turned into a feeling of resentment, and it's super pathological, and it's like everything else. He's pointing out that the socialist is what they call in like psych stuff, fragilizing the people. People are not capable of working and
Yeah.
feeding
Yeah.
themselves. Like somehow human beings got crapped onto the earth without any capacity to survive, unlike fucking mole rats. Like I just, so he points that out too. He's like, what are we?
Yeah. I completely agree with what you're saying. So while I'm a libertarian, I have this view that like a negative conception of liberty, meaning that like what liberty is like you are free to do what you want with your own private property, but you are not free. You're not allowed to do what you want to somebody else against their will. So I have this same thing, but I also, like as a Christian, I believe in positive moral obligations. Like I think I have a duty to help people out who are in need, take care of widows and orphans, obviously take care of my family and provide for my family, and those sorts of things. And also, just, generally like participate in the community and, do things that would help out. Like in the case that there was, in the case of like a tornado or hurricane or something, like I would absolutely be out in my neighborhood, help clear out the roads and that sort of thing. But you're also right that the state has crowded that out. And like you can look at the way charitable giving changes over time. And if you compare that to like moments where the state intervenes, where the state, comes up with some new program, whether it's food stamps, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education, what you'll see is that the state eats into what people were already doing voluntarily, what people are already doing out of the goodness of their own hearts, out of their own sense of charity, out of their own sense of what their moral obligations are, whether that's a spiritual thing or whatever. And it's terrible. And I mean that and truly, because what the state is robbing people of is not just their money. They're not just taking money out of your pocket. They're actually robbing you of this opportunity to be a good person, to act in the world and be a part of your community in the way that you ought to. And the state has taken that away, and it's bad. It's just it's a terrible thing.
I think there are real solid stats of a very significant impact of Social Security, in that it has created a big gulf between grandparents and grandchildren, parents and grandparents, in that they no longer have to live anywhere near them. They don't even get along as well. Some huge number, like the divorce stat from the 60s, just a tremendous impact. But also these do-gooder government types, they don't admit it, but it's like your blue Democrats in rich states. They're getting a VIG. So if they're going to take off the top, if this is how they make their money, it's in their interest to promote the problem. And I use like LBJ as an example. Okay, we tried the Great Society. It's 60 years. You guys are happy, right? Everything's cool. Like it worked, I mean, it's where everything's worse, and by their own measures, and they continue to say, yeah, it's worse, so we have to do it more. It's like, okay, but this idea of fragilizing the person, and we're human beings not capable of functioning, leads into the next and final quote, which is, it is only needful to open almost at random a book on philosophy, politics, or history to see how strongly this idea, the child of classical studies and the mother of socialism, I don't know if you have a thought on that, but is rooted in our country, that mankind is merely inert matter receiving life, organization, morality, and wealth from power. Or rather, and still worse, that mankind itself tends towards degradation and is only arrested in its tendency by the mysterious hand of the legislator. So man is bad, but the man is good.
And man isn't man. So yeah, what
Yes,
Bastiat is saying is that these people who think that they can manage the affairs of others, like the conniving politicians, the bureaucrats who dream that they can manage all of the affairs of all of their fellow men, well, they're treating them like game pieces, or like these cogs in a machine or something like that. And so, and that's what he's pointing out. And I have no idea what he's talking about with the child of classical studies and the mother of
I
socialism.
know.
I
The
flipped to the
Greeks.
page.
I think he talks about the Greeks,
Oh, I see. Yeah. So maybe
Sparta.
like the collectivism of those societies. Is that what he's talking about?
I think if I recall, he brings up the Greeks a time or two, particularly Sparta. I could be wrong, but yes, I think he's focusing specifically on the more authoritarian of the Greek experiments. I could be wrong, but you've got Rome too. There is a lot of authoritarianism in the if you study the governments as opposed
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
philosophers. I think I was thinking of philosophers, but maybe he's really talking about the political scene.
Well, Plato had some pretty crazy ideas, like socialism for the military or something like that. Like he had this idea that I mean, it was almost like the utopian socialists of the early 19th century, talking about these dreamed up barracks, and like had this system for hierarchies and authorities and who's going to make all these decisions. And I think there was some of that in Plato. And I have to go back to
No,
my
I,
Rothbard economic thought before Adam Smith to remind
so
myself.
someone pointed out to me, maybe this is obvious to everybody, but it wasn't to me. So Catholic upbringing, that's like Aristotelian, liberty Aristotelian. Uh, Someone pointed out to me that the medieval monasteries were really Platonism in action, that they were all together. The like natural elite, whatever, was pulled up to be the little king. And I thought it was interesting. But of course, it was totally voluntary,
Yeah.
completely voluntary. And that's why it works. Anything can work if it's voluntary. But when it starts to be coercive, that's when, and that's what he opens with, and that's what I think the bottom line is. You can do anything you want, but when you start coercing people to take their stuff, basically is the number one thing, the entire system becomes corrupt, and life and liberty are all impaired. And I think he starts with some like American style stuff, like all you need is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whatever
Yeah.
words
Yeah.
he used. And I think that's, I think we could do to everyone should reread the law right now. I think.
Yeah. What you just reminded me of is that I can't remember who said this, but somebody said if you live in a capitalist country ruled by free markets, private property, you are 100% free to go start a socialist commune by yourself or with you and some friends, like you and a group of other families. Go for it. Like there would be no reason for the police to come in and stop you from trying to live in that sort of way where you're sharing everything, no wages, no prices, no private property in terms of like the means of production. Like go for it. Everybody would be like, best of luck to you. That sounds great.
See you on the other side.
It's not for me, but go for it. However, if you think of the opposite sort of situation where there's like this like socialist state, like sort of a totalitarian government, central planning board, they would not tolerate for 1 second a group of people trying to strike out and have a capitalistic commune or free market commune where we're just going to ignore the central planning board. We're not going to do what they tell us. We're just going to go live and do our own thing and have private property and prices over here in this little area. That would not be tolerated. And they would, get sent to the gulag, right?
That's a great thing to demonstrate why I like it's called the law. Like, why is he calling this the law? He doesn't call it the economy. He calls it the law. And he defines it immediately as the use of collective force.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to have absolute limits, and think of all the ills that cascade from that. Whereas liberty, you can have whatever you want. So the plunderers strike back. But I do think it's important to remember now, like, just stick to the principles, because you're going to be embarrassed that you forgot them when
Mm-hmm.
Governor Newsom doesn't wield the pen as much as Trump does. That's the problem. It's like, you realize, of course, the pendulum's going to swing back
Yep.
hard.
Yep.
Well, although it's already, yikes. Anyway, so Dr. Newman, thank you so much for your valuable time and insight. It was super fun talking to you. I'm glad that we saw eye to eye. Sometimes, I don't know, like, because in the old days, like, especially the immigration thing, it was it's just it's out of control now, and it does go back to the private property thing. But yes, you can have debates among libertarians about some of these things because they're competing rights issues, I guess. But yeah, so it's super fun talking to you. And is there anything that people can do to support your work? I know Mises.org has everything that you write. I've seen videos on there too, but what else, or maybe your books?
Yeah. Mises.org is great if you want to see what I'm writing on the wire. One thing that's relevant to our discussion that I can promote is I wrote a children's book called The Broken Window. Since we're talking about Bastiat talked about or actually he originated the broken window parable.
Really? The fallacy of the broken window? Really?
Yeah. That started with Bastiat
I
in
didn't know
his set of essays called "That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen," and then it was popularized, especially for an American audience, by Henry Hazlitt in Economics in One Lesson. But I turned that story, I sort of brought together Hazlitt and Bastiat's version and made it a children's book version. But yeah, you can find that at the Mises bookstore or on Amazon.
What
It's called
age would you say that's appropriate for?
It's actually a rhyming version of the story, so you could read this to the littlest of kids, and it's got like these bright, colorful illustrations. I didn't do the illustrations. I found a guy who does great illustrations, and
It's called The Broken Window.
The Broken Window. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. And I've got little nieces and nephews coming up, so I've been collecting little things for them on chemtrails, and I've got it all. I've got a whole library of stuff for little kids to wean on. But so that's awesome stuff, and I hope that you have great success. I really love when academics or really good journalists have integrity and are putting their efforts on our side, because there's a lot of us just kind of hacking away and trying to, like, keep our feet on the ground, keep our hopes high, have the right arguments, to be able to defend our principled positions. And we rely on people like you that lay the stuff out in a very clear, understandable way, but that's backed up with a lot of depth of thought, so that you can really dig in. It's not, it's not a gut instinct. It's a highly educated position. And I just have always loved that about the Mises Institute, is that and I like it too about, like, Catholicism. I like Aquinas. Like, there's no depth of questioning that you can't find somebody who thought about it and engaged in some discourse. So I really love and appreciate what you do. And I'm sure, it's not, you're not going to end up with whatever a mansion in Malibu, but hopefully you're happy. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Jonathan Newman.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.